Delta strikes back. EU says okay to HPE. Google's a little too trusting. NVIDIA's not running just yet. And we're going to take a closer look at all of the stuff coming out of Intel and what's in store for their future in this episode of the Gestalt IT Rundown. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Rundown for today, which is August the 7th. And we are very happy to have you here with us on this National Lighthouse Day. So go out to your favorite cape and say hi to that old grizzled sailor that still lights the lamp at the top of the lighthouse. And I don't even know if that's how lighthouses work anymore. But I can tell you that I am joined by my co-host, John. John, welcome back to the show. It's a pleasure to have you.
Hey, Tom, I was just in Portland, Maine. I saw the famous lighthouse.
Nice. Well, I'm very happy that you were able to do that. Did you see any sea serpents while you were there?
I saw what looked like a finger extending out of the water, but it wasn't a serpent.
Oh, well, it's National Sea Serpent Day, which I feel like goes hand in hand with Lighthouse. So, All right, I want to welcome everyone to the very first Gestalt IT Rundown Circular Firing Squad segment because we've got a doozy here. Delta Airlines CEO Ed Bastian is putting the price tag on this whole Crowdstrike fiasco at around $500 million. How's he going to get that? Well, everyone's favorite thing, legal action. Crowdstrike shareholders are going to sue their company. But really, who's to blame? And where does Microsoft stand in all this? Not to mention Delta. On Monday, Crowdstrike pointed the finger, probably one of those shiny middle ones, at Delta, claiming that the airline ignored offers of help during the service meltdown. I'm just going to go ahead and say maybe everyone in this situation is to blame because let's see here. Doing the numbers, 6,000 flights were impacted. About 500,000 people. Remember, Ed Bastian was talking about how amazing Delta was, and then, of course, he took off to the Olympics. I think this is going to be a really big black eye for most of Delta's reputation going forward. But, John, you've covered this extensively. I mean, what's going to happen here between Delta and CrowdStrike?
They're going to blame each other, which they already have. And in a sense, it's going to be interesting because Microsoft kind of falls through the cracks, right? Microsoft's taken this stance, which is always a perfect Microsoft stance. It's almost like something out of the Google playbook. They don't say anything. They offer no comment. They let everyone else kind of stew and get angry over things. This is a bad situation, Tom, especially for Ed Bastian. I remember interviewing him a couple of years ago as he was a keynote speaker at CES. He has pinned a great deal of Delta's future and their reputation on their tech savvy. And for this to happen was incredibly embarrassing, but also, in a sense, Delta is to blame. This updates and the internal machinations of Delta weren't good enough to handle it, and consequently, they're going to do some deep inward thinking. I think for poor CrowdStrike, I say poor CrowdStrike, they had a good reputation, I'll say a sterling reputation until this happens, and now they're the focus of black hats. People are going to be talking about just maintenance, about compliance, about just blocking and tackling versus security breaches. So in a sense, it's unfortunate, but what happened to CrowdStrike has happened to most everyone else. So don't point a finger at them in particular. I think also one of the big things, Tom, my biggest takeaway from all of this was that the world is so interconnected, and with AI in the mix now, there's more data in play, there are more people impacted. This story was a international story. It went worldwide. It was affecting the press, which will get their attention, of course. And so again, careful what you wish for, because if you move too fast and you're too interconnected in this digital economy, you're going to get burned. The EU has decided there are no concerns with the Juniper networks being acquired by HPE. That's interesting. According to a report released last week, the Commission doing the investigation decided that the merger would not significantly reduce the competition in the networking market. This analysis was developed helped by the fact that HPE and Juniper are not the closest of competitors, according to investigators. The deal is not expected to be analyzed by China due to its falling below an investigation threshold, leaving the U.S. Federal Trade Commission at the last hurdle. This is interesting because, Tom, the FTC's been cracking down or trying to crack down on big tech mergers. What went wrong here? Or what's going on here?
To me, when I read through the article, this felt like one of those horribly backhanded compliments, like, oh, you are way too pretty to be that smart. Like, that's honestly, one of the things that kind of drove me nuts about this thing, I mean, a friend of mine actually shared this news as soon as it came out. And one of the things that I look at is, first of all, you got to remember that, there's obviously a number one player in this market. And let's be fair, we all know who it is. It's Cisco. I would say that number two has been contested for a while. If we're talking about specifically in the wireless market, that would be, Juniper has been fighting very hard since the Mist acquisition. Aruba has had a pretty good hold there. I mean, you've got other players like Extreme, you've got some up-and-comers like Arista and Ruckus. But realistically speaking, when a major regulatory body comes to you and says, number two could buy number three or number four, depending on how you look at it, and there will not be any material impact competition into this market, that has to sting. Like, that would be like if Freddie and Jason teamed up to take on Michael Myers and everyone's like, yeah, Michael's not going to lose. That hurts. But I think that what this clearly signals, though, is that this is not going to get any kind of review. So if you look ahead, this isn't even going to be looked at by the Chinese, because the Chinese have a certain threshold for the dollar amounts in order for them to take a look at it. This isn't anywhere close to that. This is a significant investment. Don't get me wrong. This is not chump change. It's just not the kind of money that would force the Chinese to look at it, because these two companies are not very big in China because of all of the networking machinations that we've seen over the years. Now, if Cisco was buying one of these two companies, probably Juniper, that would materially reduce the amount of competition in the market. And I think that the regulators would take a look at that. So the question is then, does the US FTC decide to take a look at this? I don't think they are. Now, again, I'm not a financial analyst or a soothsayer, so I don't know exactly what's going to happen, but I don't think that this is going to be something that's going to really raise the alarms over there. This is not an Activision Blizzard. This is not an NVIDIA ARM. This is two networking companies that kind of aren't direct competitors buying each other. I mean, when you think about it, other than their wireless space, they don't really overlap a whole lot. I mean, yes, HPE Aruba makes networking equipment, and yes, Juniper does. But Juniper's big cash cow is something that HPE Aruba doesn't compete in. Sure, the campus is a little bit of an overlap, but is it really? Like, I'm optimistic, obviously. Like, I've worked with both of these companies over the years. I have good relationships with both of their teams. I think this is going to be a net win for everybody, because it makes there be a clear number two in the market with a lot of support for a lot of advanced new technologies like Wi-Fi 7 or, security. I mean, literally all you got to do is go watch all the videos that we posted from HP Discover this year and just imagine all of that with Marvis, and you kind of see where people are going to be coming from. Again, bullish, optimistic, but that's just how it goes. All right. I was going to look for this last story, but I couldn't find it because a U.S. federal judge has ruled that Google's deals to be the default search engine on a number of devices and operating systems is in fact a violation of antitrust laws. Judge Amit Mehta concluded that the deals reduce competition in the search industry and gave Google a very unfair advantage. Google has reportedly paid a number of companies tens of billions of dollars every year to be the default search, whether it's an iPhone or a number of other devices. Now, the judge is still figuring out the penalties, but industry experts are now saying that this could have a significant impact on how Google approaches their ad and search business. And here's the other thing. Apple got a lot of money from Google that was directly applied to their services bottom line. And the amount of money that was applied to their services bottom line was almost as much as Google paid them. That means that maybe Google isn't the default search engine on Safari anymore. What about Verizon? What about Samsung? This is going to be one of those things that we're going to be unpacking for a number of years to come. But John, I kind of want to get your thoughts on this because I know it's something that you've talked about recently. How does this all fall out for Google?
It's going to fall out not very well. I mean, this has been going on for years. This is part of the Department of Justice's multi-pronged antitrust scrutiny of the company. I know we're going to talk about scrutiny later, but this is something that they've been looking into, something they've been working toward. They talked to Satya Nadella, who helped them in the case as a witness. Apple, unwittingly, Eddie Q was the guy who mentioned the $20 billion that Apple got in 2022. Turns out Google was paying upwards of $26 billion, and they were just lavishing the money on Samsung, Verizon, whomever. And in a sense, that created this default search engine for them. Now, what's going to happen is there's going to be another trial to determine what the penalty is going to be. The penalty could be something as severe as breaking up or breaking off the search element, which I don't think is going to happen. There could be a fine, which is more likely to happen. Or in a sense, Google might be forced into recommending other types of search engines, which will never happen. So what's interesting to me is if this continues where they're separated or cleaved away from their partners, where do they go? Do they also work with a Microsoft, which is unlikely, DuckDuckGo, probably unlikely. Um, the thing to me, that the big takeaway to me beyond search, and this is significant, is that we're going to be seeing more actions. We already are seeing more actions. Justice is looking into Apple. The EU outside the US is looking into the various operations of Apple, Amazon, etc., especially through the Direct Marketing Act. There's the EU AI Act, which has already influenced Apple in slowing down its AI developments to skirt possible fines and penalties. To me, it's a huge victory for the Justice Department. This actually, remember, Tom, this action started during the Trump administration, and I think it was 2019. It was like 5 years ago, 6 years ago, 5 years ago, and it was continuing through Biden. And I think it shows that maybe even these antiquated antitrust laws that we dismissed as being unenforceable actually can be enforced. And consequently, this might open the floodgates to more legal action, not just by the DOJ, but the FTC. And remember, also, state attorneys general sued Google in this case. So for big tech, it's a big warning sign and something that will not go away for several more years. If you're a big tech company, there's a word that makes your blood boil cold, run cold. Let me start again, sorry. If you're a big tech company, there's a word that makes your blood run cold, and that's scrutiny. In this case, the folks at NVIDIA have to be frustrated because their acquisition of Israeli startup Run.ai is now on hold as, you guessed it, the Department of Justice wants to take another look at the specifics. In particular, the government is asking whether or not the purchase would reduce competition in the emerging AA market, as well as further cementing NVIDIA as the dominant player in the same market. The move is but one of the investigations as the government has opened up into AI companies, as the technology has raced to impressive valuations. And building on what we just talked about with Google and DOJ, Tom, it looks like the government is emboldened.
They are. And I think back to when I was a teenager, and I was a teenager. I made some mistakes. And suddenly, after I made that mistake, I couldn't get away with anything. Like, my parents watched me like hawks. Now, of course, I was a good kid and I never got in trouble. But you'd be hard pressed to convince them that I didn't. Like, don't be late. Don't be a minute past your bedtime. Why is that? Well, authority figures love to scrutinize people when they've shown that they're less than trustworthy. Or in this case, when they feel like it could be a less than trustworthy move. So I'm not implying that NVIDIA is not trustworthy. I mean, I've seen Jensen Huang. Anybody who wears the leather jacket can't be a rebel, right? What's happening is that when you have, what are we looking at now? Just shy of a few $1 trillion of valuation. I mean, what do you do with that much money? Well, when you're a CEO who's beholden to a board and shareholders, you have to do something to invest that money to provide returns, right? Which means you need to go out and buy a company. Are you going to do like the weird South Korean model where you like buy a washing machine manufacturer and a crane operator and all this other stuff? Probably not. You're going to buy companies that are materially important to the business that you're doing. And in this case, NVIDIA wanted to buy a startup that was basically doing things to make creating GPU clusters easier. I mean, that's kind of a no-brainer, right? Except when you have trillions of dollars and you buy out your competitors, that kind of looks like crushing competition in the market. And that is such a really hard thing to get around, because actual like business-like behavior, when you are the 855-pound gorilla in the market, is squashing competition. And here's the other thing, because I was reading through some of the comments on the linked article that we have here. About half of the people are like, yes, this is what companies should do so they don't get ousted by their shareholders. And the other half are like, man, I really hope a company like AMD is able to get their act together and figure out a way to solve this problem. And then there was one guy in the middle who's like, yeah, AMD is so far behind, this isn't even funny. And that was one of the things that made me think about this. What other companies could buy run AI? Well, I mean, could AMD? Could Intel? Are they at a point where they need the technology that run AI is offering? I mean, because the only other thing, and we've seen this with ARM, is if you get rejected, or worse yet, if somebody else rejects your bid to buy somebody, that can actually put the company in some interesting straits. Because if you have to reject a massive offer because of a regulatory issue, what does that say about the other company? If there's only one group out there that was willing to buy them, are they really like, can they hang their hat on that? So I think what's going to happen is that the DOJ is looking at everything related to AI, whether it's NVIDIA, OpenAI, Microsoft, or anything. They're going to put some guidance onto this acquisition. I don't think they're going to sink this one. This isn't as big as ARM. Run AI is not integral to the operations of so many other organizations. But I think what they're going to do is they're either going to make NVIDIA, like they're going to force them to offer some kind of thing to allow people to use parts of Run AI for free or for reduced cost, or to ensure that they're not going to subsume it completely and lock out the competition. This is very similar to what we saw with AMD and Silo AI, where Silo AI was offering these models for free. And as far as I know, AMD is not going to stop that. I think what you're going to see is you're going to have to agree that, competitors can use these services in certain ways without restriction. And that should probably get at least, the FTC part of it off the bat. The DOJ will eventually go away, I think, because the DOJ administrator, Cantor, is flexing his muscles a little bit. And I think what will eventually happen is they'll peel back a little bit and say, okay, we've got to start letting some of these acquisitions happen. Mostly because if we don't, a lot of these companies, either the smaller acquired companies are going to go out of business, but the larger companies are going to cool off on their acquisitions, maybe sit on their money a little bit, and it won't get reinvested into the wider market. And that could create issues, as frankly, we've already seen a little bit this week. Speaking of which, as soon as the story broke last week, we knew we wanted to take a closer look at it. And that's probably because it's not a really great day for Intel and a lot of their workers. Because in an earnings call last week, the CPU giant revealed that while they did hit their target revenue guidance numbers after adjustment, there are some storm clouds on the horizon for everybody's favorite nerd factory. Challenges from AI companies, issues with some of their most recent chip developments, and a lot of cost cutting means that Pat Gelsinger is going back to the chopping block. Now, I will be the first person to admit I'm a Pat fan. So is Stephen Foskett and a lot of the other people here at the Rundown. However, they expressed to the industry that the way they're going to do this is by starting off and reducing 15% of their workforce. That's somewhere between 15 and 17,000 employees. They're going to suspend dividend payments through the end of this year through Q4. Analysts, including our own Daniel Newman, who did a great episode of 6.5 on this, said that Intel is definitely facing headwinds, but they have a lot of projects on the table that give them potential, provided they can deliver on them. This is a really big story. And I know, John, you guys said that you did an episode of Textron Gang specially focused on this. I'm going to let you open up. What are your thoughts on Intel and, quite frankly, some bad news?
It's not surprising. And like you and Steve, and I am a fan of Pat from his days at VMware in particular. He's a good man. He's one of the few normal, upstanding CEOs you can find. He also, I think, inherited a nearly impossible situation. He walked into a company that had missed out on mobile and AI. It had been moving slowly. Actually, it went from one of the great innovators of Silicon Valley to a great litigator to hold its market share. I'm going to put it this way, Tom. Years and years ago, when I was working at USA Today, we used to interview Steve Jobs a lot. And one of the questions I always wanted to ask him was, what are the companies that you most respect in the Valley or anywhere? He mentioned 4 companies. Intel was one of them. And now to see what they've gone through and what they have to achieve to get to the sun or the light skies is going to be quite difficult. Daniel was on the episode as well as the Techstrong gang talking about Intel, and he said basically they have to be flawless, they have to be perfect, and one of the things they're going to have to do is is manufacturing these fab labs, especially in the United States, which is not easy to do and it takes a long time. So that's part of the equation. The other equation is that they're always held up, not always, but often held up to NVIDIA and others, even AMD. And so he has to meet these expectations that are outsized. And once you lay off 15,000 people and once you start making cuts to companies, it's really hard to stop making cuts. And I think I fear that they fall into the same trap that HP had done for years, where they just kept cutting and cutting to meet their numbers in terms of profitability, and even to a lesser extent Cisco. I think of this as a great American tragedy in a sense. Perhaps he pulls it off, but it's been rocky the last couple of years. I'll have to be honest.
You're not wrong. This is not the first time we've had this conversation. And I think that maybe the bright spot here is that this is not the start of Pat's cuts. This is a continuation of him realizing that Intel is not where it needs to be right now. And look, Intel 3 years ago was not in a good place. Intel today is in a better place. You may not believe it. Like the poor sod that invested $700,000 in Intel stock on Wall Street bets is probably kicking himself right now, but he shouldn't kick himself, because you know what? There's nowhere to go but up from here. I'll tell you why. And I agree with Daniel completely. Intel has to deliver. That is not even on the table anymore. That is a absolute maxim. Gaudi has to come out, even if it's not going to upset the apple cart, because you have to have a success to build on success. If Gaudi fails, then whatever's coming next is not going to work, because nobody will listen to them. They have to compete and be ready to get down in the trenches against AMD, not NVIDIA. Hold that thought. They have to compete against AMD because their bread and butter is CPUs. You know, Intel is not a software company. Intel is not a services company. Intel is not a company that manufactures anything other than chips. And if you are being beat up by your closest competitor, you are going to lose no matter what else you do if you can't do the thing that you were built to do right. So if they're ever going to compete against NVIDIA, they have to defend themselves against AMD, because NVIDIA is eating everybody's lunch right now. You've got to defend your house. More importantly, as Daniel said, you've got to build more houses. Now, this is where I think some of the analysis is a little bit off. Intel got a lot of money from the CHIPS Act, and Intel is going to invest that money in building fabs. That's good. Intel is going to increase fab capacity and possibly even farm out some of their fab operations to other people. That's good. What's bad is Wall Street punishing Intel for not building a fab in a month. You can't do that. We know that. We're not playing on a quarterly timeline with Intel right now. We're playing on a yearly timeline if we're lucky. It could even be a decade before all the fab operations are up and running. And there's a lot of stuff that can happen in a decade, because 10 years ago, Intel was unstoppable. We all knew that. But what's going to happen is that Pat's going to get judged every 3 months on something that is completely out of his control. Even if he could assemble the Constructicons and every available worker on the planet to build these fabs, they're not going to get built in the amount of time that Wall Street wants them to be built on. And when you look at the fact that they're going out and they're lowering their guidance and saying, you know, we're going to miss, when they have legitimate issues with their latest 13 and 14 gen CPUs that honestly they don't think they're going to be able to fix. Things like that happen when you're working at the scales that these things are. And I'm not excusing it. Hey, Intel, do better about building chips. The problem is that when you have these massive x86 CISC processors and something goes wrong in them, that material impacts as opposed to something like an ARM chip, where it's like, oh, great, there's a problem with the yields on the M4s. Well, you know, we'll just make a whole bunch more of them and correct that yield. It's not complicated enough. When you look at the shift away from using Intel, that says that Intel's either too big to really integrate into what's going on, or they need to innovate in those areas. And that's where I think that they have a chance to really succeed. but Wall Street's got to give them a little time to turn this ship. I've talked about it before on a lot of companies like Cisco. Cisco is maybe not as big as Intel, but they have the same agility issues that Intel does, which is that aircraft carrier doesn't turn on a dime. So shifting a company like Cisco from a hardware box pusher to a software services company is succeeding slowly. Intel shifting away from all of the myriad of things that they were doing, moving back down to a company that makes chips and farms out fabrication facilities and then uses those chips to move into markets like AI and other things, is not something that's going to happen overnight.
Unfortunately, Wall Street doesn't think rationally. So I believe and I fear for Intel shareholders at least is that every 90 days with this 90-day shot clock, they're going to get punished. So the expectations, they're going to fall short of them. And once a company is wounded, they become catnip to a lot of people, the investor community, activist investors. They'll put more and more pressure on him. And I think once you fall behind, especially in the Valley, there's this perception that once you're wounded and once you're yesterday's company, that it's really difficult to escape that. And I think it's a poor comparison, but I think of what Marissa Mayer went through with Yahoo. She went into this once strong company that was clearly in decline. There's really nothing much she could do. And I fear that Pat is in the same situation. And I think he's going to be the victim of it eventually. And I don't see a happy ending for him.
Yeah. Well, Pat, we're all thinking about you. We have faith in you. Make this happen, because I want to keep covering positive stories about you. It's what we do. There's a lot of other things coming up that I want to talk about that we've got scheduled through the next couple of months here on the Rundown. The first one, of course, is Stephen Foskett, who's actually on site in Kansas City at Share today. He'll be doing AI Field Day, which is coming up September 11th and 12th. We have some exciting presentations from companies like Fabrica and Elastic. I'm going to be tuning in to follow along with those great presentations. The next week, Stephen's busy again with Edge Field Day. That's September 18th and 19th. He is, going to be back out in Silicon Valley talking about all things edge computing and the technology behind that. And I teased it last week, and it's time to make a big reveal here on the Rundown. On September the 24th, I'm going to be back out in Sunnyvale, California with my friends from Nokia, and we're going to be doing a special Networking Field Day exclusive event with them. Details will be up on the website by the time you watch the story. We are going to be inviting some great networking focused delegates. We're going to be getting some great presentations. I got a sneak peek yesterday, and while I can't say exactly what I saw, you're not going to want to miss it. I'll give you a hint. Mike Bouchong is involved, so you know it's going to be good. And then after that, we are going to have AI Data Infrastructure Field Day on October 2nd and 3rd. Stephen's going to be talking about AI and all the stuff that makes it work. So you're going to want to tune in for that. And of course, check out techfieldday.com for more great events that we got lined up through the end of the year. I mean, Stephen and I are going to be pretty busy, but that means that, we're out there helping make things happen. So we have a lot of great stuff to report about here on the Rundown. And John, if people want to check out some of the stuff that you do when you're not helping me co-host the Rundown, where can they go to learn that?
Well, you can go to techstrong.ai, or this week is going to be Security Boulevard because I'm at Black Hats. Lucky me. DevOps, Digital CXO, where we write about things like Google losing a major sweeping antitrust lawsuit to the Department of Justice. All sorts of fun stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure next week's Rundown is going to be filled with a lot of news coming out of Black Hat because folks like Mitch, Ashley, and Krista McComber Case are going to be out there. So we're going to be covering that as well. Remember, we are live, pseudo live, every Wednesday here on the Rundown. So catch us on YouTube. For the video, catch gestaltit.com for the show notes and linked articles. Check your favorite podcast application of choice if you want to pop us in while you're doing your 5K for the day. We are also streamed on techstrong.tv, as well as all of our other great stuff through Tech Field Day and other events that we do. We also are on a lot of the TechStrong and Future Group programs, and we love interacting and talking about all the cool things that we see. We're going to be back next Wednesday with more great IT news. Until then, for Tom Hollingsworth, for John Schwartz, for Stephen Foskett, and our amazing producer, Corey Dierig, who you never get to see, but keeps this rodeo going every week. Thank you very much for being a part of Gestalt IT Rundown. Take care of yourselves. Enjoy.